The rain poured like judgment from the heavens the night Julie was tossed out, barefoot, soaked, and pregnant. At just 15, she should have been buried in her WAC textbooks, not being forced into a life she didn't choose. That evening, the house no longer felt like home. Her stepmother, Florence, stood at the door with a look colder than the storm outside. "Take her," she spat, throwing a plastic bag of Julie's belongings at a confused, weary-looking man standing in the rain. "She's no use to us anymore. Let her go beg with you. That bastard in her belly and her cursed bloodline can rot anywhere but here." Julie's heart pounded. She didn't even know this man. She had never exchanged a word with him before tonight. He looked as stunned as she was, but Florence didn't care. The decision had been made. Julie had begged, cried, screamed that she didn't even know how it had happened, but Florence never believed her. Or rather, she did, but chose to protect the real culprit. Julie had seen the fear in Florence's eyes when she mentioned a name, the one she suspected. That's when the hostility turned violent. Florence knew who was responsible, but instead of justice, Julie was served betrayal. The rain fell hard that night, like the heavens themselves had witnessed the injustice and couldn't stay silent. Julie stood there, soaked to the skin, her belly round and heavy at just 15, 7 months gone, and not a soul to defend her. Her cries meant nothing. Her pleas were met with silence or ridicule. Neighbors peeked from their windows or stood in their doorways, watching as if it were some evening entertainment. No one asked questions. No one stopped Florence. They simply let it happen. Let her be handed off to a stranger like unwanted baggage, pregnant, broken, forgotten. But this horror, didn't begin tonight. It started months ago. Julie had always felt uneasy around Uncle Femi, Florence's younger brother. He lingered too long when he hugged her. His eyes roamed places they shouldn't. He found excuses to brush against her when no one was looking. She had tried to tell Florence, whispered it one afternoon, her voice shaking as she confessed she didn't feel safe. "Uncle Femi touches me weird sometimes," she said, her hands clutched together, heart pounding. But Florence only scoffed. "He's just being playful, Julie. Don't be dramatic. He's family." And that was the end of it. Until that evening. Julie had just returned from her tutorial classes. The compound was quiet. Florence had stepped out. It was just her and Uncle Femi. She remembered placing her books on the table, hoping to rush into her room and lock the door. But he was faster, his voice low, his grip firm. He dragged her back, muffling her screams with his hands, pushing her against the cold, tiled floor. He took what he had no right to, what she could never get back. She didn't speak for days. She couldn't. Her body hurt, but her soul, it was shattered. When she finally found the courage to say something, Florence's response was crueler than the act itself. "You shameless girl. You probably seduced him with your presence in this house. Who knows how many other men you've thrown yourself at?" Another slap followed, her cheek burning. But it couldn't burn hotter than the shame Florence forced her to carry alone. Now, months later, belly swollen, dignity crushed, Florence had the audacity to blame her again. "You've brought disgrace upon us. You're just like your useless mother." And as the rain soaked the earth, so did Julie's hope. It felt like the end. She beats her more, not allowing her to express herself. Her father, Mr. Andrew, was working on a construction site far up north, and he wouldn't be back for months. He had no idea what was happening. The night air was heavy, soaked with silence and sorrow, as Julie sat huddled in the corner of the cold room, 7 months gone, her eyes red from endless tears. She had cried until her throat burned, but help never came. The neighbors only watched from afar, some whispering, others laughing behind closed doors. Her cries were echoes in a world that had already decided she didn't matter. And standing above her, face twisted in cruelty, was the woman who should have sheltered her, Florence, her stepmother. "This one won't shame me any further," Florence spat. I'll find a homeless man and marry her off. Let her go and be useful to someone in the gutter." Julie had no one left. Her father, Mr. Andrew, worked far up north on a distant construction site. He had left months ago and hadn't returned since. There were no phone calls, no letters. Julie didn't even have a phone of her own. She had no way to reach him, no way to scream for the only person who might have believed her. Every night she knelt beside her mat, whispering into the dark, hoping her father would somehow hear her prayers, that he would come back and take her away from this place. But the silence always answered, and in that silence she carried her pain like a secret too heavy for her young heart. Her mother, Adana, was gone too, snatched from her when Julie was barely 10. They said it was a heart attack, sudden and cruel, leaving her in the hands of a woman who never saw her as anything more than a burden. Since then, life had become a cycle of commands, punishments, and cruel threats. Florence made it clear, Julie's worth was in how fast she could be rid of her. "Even your mother was weak," Florence would sneer, "and now you're just like her, useless and cursed." But what broke Julie wasn't just the threats. It was the way she begged, the way her voice cracked when she pleaded not to be sent away, how she clutched her swollen belly with trembling hands, praying someone would see the girl still hiding behind the broken pieces. But to Florence, she was no longer a child, just a mistake to be discarded. And Julie? She had learned to cry quietly, because even her tears were starting to annoy them. That evening came like a nightmare wrapped in silence. Julie was lying on the floor, curled on her side, the cold cement biting through the thin mat beneath her. Her body was sore, her heart heavier than it had ever been. She heard the creak of the door, then the all-too-familiar footsteps. Florence, her stepmother. Her voice, as usual, was sharp, cruel, and final. "Get up," she snapped. "Dress up. You're leaving today. Your husband is waiting." Julie turned to face her, eyes wide, body trembling. "Please, I'm just 15, she whispered, her voice breaking, barely escaping her throat. "Just 15. Florence scoffed, eyes narrowing like Julie had said something ridiculous. "But you were grown enough to open your legs, weren't you? Now you want to act like a child?" Her words cut deep, deeper than any slap she had ever given her. Julie's stomach churned, not just from the pain of carrying a child far too early, but from the shame Florence forced down her throat every day. She tried to explain again, for what felt like the 1,000th time, how Uncle Femi had taken advantage of her, how she hadn't wanted it, how he had disappeared the moment her belly started to show. But Florence only rolled her eyes, unmoved. "He's gone now, and you're the one left behind to carry the shame, so carry it somewhere else." Julie cried until her lips cracked, her voice hoarse. She begged. God knows she begged. She wasn't ready to leave. She didn't even know the man Florence had chosen for her. But Florence didn't care. She pulled her by the arm, dragging her out of the house like she was garbage. Her old clothes barely fit anymore, stretched tight over her swollen stomach. And there, by the door, stood the man. Unkempt. Silent. A stranger. A homeless man Florence had found on the street and decided was good enough for her. She shoved an old nylon bag at Julie, her entire life stuffed inside, and spat, "Take your cursed bloodline and go. Don't ever come back." Julie nearly fell from the weight of it all. Her legs buckled. She gripped her belly as a sharp pain ripped through her. She needed to sit, to breathe, but Florence wouldn't stop shouting. "Go with him. He'll put you to better use than we ever could. You two can beg for food together. That's all you're worth." Julie turned one last time, hoping Florence would see the broken girl behind her eyes, hoping something in her would soften. But all she saw was hatred. The door slammed shut behind Julie with a final thud that echoed louder than her sobs. Her vision was blurred with tears as she stared at the wooden frame that once separated her from the world outside, and now from every shred of safety she ever knew. She was still standing there, trembling, when the man beside her, scruffy, unfamiliar and silent, slowly extended his hand. "Simeon," he said, voice low and rough, as though unused to speaking. Julie didn't move. She couldn't. She only stared at the ground, ignoring his gesture. He sighed quietly, then bent to gather the scattered bundle of her belongings Florence had tossed like trash. "Let's go," he murmured. Julie's feet didn't move. Her heart thudded louder than the laughter behind the curtains and the walls. Mocking voices trickled in from every corner. Neighbors whispered, pointed, some even chuckled. Watching the girl with the swollen belly, handed off to a homeless man like she was yesterday's disgrace. Some wore pity on their faces, others amusement. No one came forward. No one asked if she was okay. The dusty wind felt heavier than ever as she took her first slow step beside Simeon, the man she was now tied to without a word of her own. She kept begging, her voice now hoarse. "Please, please don't do this to me," she whispered again and again. But the tears had dried, and her legs wobbled beneath her. Then, from inside, Florence's voice pierced the moment like a knife. "Do whatever he tells you. You're his wife now." That sentence clung to Julie's skin like ash. She turned to look at Simeon again, uncertain of who he was, uncertain of who she would become beside him. Her heart sank. Was she walking out of a nightmare or into another? They walked past the edge of the village, away from the houses she once knew, past the jeers and cold stares of people who had always seen her as less. Her belly was heavy, her body sore, her soul numb. Each step was a question without an answer. But what Julie didn't know, what she couldn't yet see, was that this wasn't where her story ended. Not even close. Julie's legs ached, her breath shallow, yet she followed Simeon through the narrowing bush path, too drained to ask where he was taking her. The silence between them stretched like a weight she couldn't carry. She wanted to speak, to demand answers, but the words clung to her throat. What was she supposed to say? Where are we going? That question felt too bold, too dangerous. Then, just as her knees threatened to buckle beneath her, Simeon stopped. "Come on," he said, his voice low, almost swallowed by the rustling trees. "We're almost there." Julie didn't reply. She couldn't. Whatever lay ahead, she was too broken to resist it. But as they stepped into a small clearing, her eyes widened. Parked in the open space was a sleek black SUV surrounded by a convoy of identical cars. Men in sharp black suits emerged with swift, coordinated movements, surrounding Simeon with silent reverence. Julie froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She was supposed to be the wife of a homeless man. So who were these people? And why were they treating him like someone important? For the first time, Simeon turned to her with a softened expression. "You're safe now," he said. But the word safe felt foreign. She had never been safe. Not with Florence. Not in that village. As one of the suited men approached and whispered, "Everything's ready, sir," Julie's fear deepened. "Sir?" She stared at Simeon, eyes filled with questions. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, voice trembling. "Please, just trust me," he replied gently. "I'm here to help you." The wind stilled. The air felt heavier. Florence's cruel voice echoed in her head, but it was gone now, left behind with the locked door and the shame. With no other path before her, Julie stepped into the SUV. As the door shut beside her, the engine hummed to life. Simeon sat beside her, calm, composed, while Julie's world spun quietly out of control. The drive was quiet. Too quiet. Julie sat stiffly in the back seat, hands trembling over her belly, eyes darting between the stranger beside her and the blur of trees rushing past the window. Simeon said nothing, not a single word. Yet he kept glancing her way, as if he could sense her questions rising like a tide. She wanted to speak, to ask who he really was, where they were going, why everything suddenly felt so strange. But she couldn't bring herself to say a word. Then, as the car rolled through a large iron gate and pulled up in front of an enormous house, Julie's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just a house, it was a mansion. Wide glass windows stretched across the building's facade, glistening under the soft afternoon light. Lush gardens framed the driveway, and everything around her screamed wealth, comfort. Things that didn't belong to a man who had met her wearing torn clothes and dust-covered shoes. Still without a word, Simeon stepped out, came around, and gently opened the door for her. He held out a hand, not forceful, just steady, as he helped her down carefully. Her eyes darted across the massive compound, her mind racing with questions she couldn't voice. She turned to him, lips parting to speak, but no sound came out. She just stared, confused, scared, unsure of whether to run or trust. "Welcome to my home," he said quietly, almost like he was apologizing for not revealing it sooner. Inside was even more surreal. The floors were smooth, polished marble that reflected the soft glow of golden light from the chandeliers above. Elegant artwork lined the walls, and the faint scent of roses hung in the air. Every step she took felt like walking through someone else's dream. He led her slowly through the vast living room and gestured toward a nearby hallway. "You'll be checked tomorrow. Tonight, you rest," he said. She was still standing when he smiled faintly and guided her toward a sleek dining room. The table was already set, steam rising from a dish that smelled far too rich for someone who'd just been married off to a homeless man. "Sit," he said, pulling out a chair. She hesitated, eyes wide. "You're frightened," he noted with a short laugh, lifting a spoon and tasting the meal. "See, it's not poisoned. You can eat." Julie slowly sat down, her heart pounding as she stared at the food. Her body was tired. Her mind was lost. Nothing made sense. A beggar earlier? Now this? She couldn't piece it together. Julie sat at the dining table, her untouched plate still steaming before her, but her appetite had long vanished beneath the weight of confusion pressing on her chest. She had barely taken a bite, her mind too tangled to focus on anything else. Finally, unable to hold it back any longer, her voice broke the silence. "Why did you pretend to be homeless?" Her words were quiet, fragile, but they struck the air like thunder between them. Simeon, still standing nearby, paused. For a moment, he didn't look at her. Then he turned slowly, eyes meeting hers, dark, steady, and filled with something unreadable. "Because if I came as who I truly was, Florence would never have let me near you. I knew she'd only give you up to someone she thought was beneath her." His voice dropped lower, calmer, almost aching. "But I saw what you were going through, Julie. I couldn't just watch. I had to step in." She stared at him, stunned, lips slightly parted. "Who are you really?" she asked, barely breathing. He took a slow breath, then walked closer to the table, sliding into the seat across from her. "My name is Simeon Damilola, CEO of Damilola Tech Holdings," he said, his tone now laced with quiet gravity. "I run one of the largest tech companies in the country." Julie blinked rapidly. Her head reeled. CEO? Tech mogul? None of this made sense. This was the same man Florence called a beggar. The same man she'd been forced to marry in shame. While earlier today she was kicked out of the house, this same evening he had brought her into his home. "But why?" she whispered, searching his face for answers. "Why would you do this? Why come for me like that?" Simeon leaned forward, elbows resting gently on the table. His eyes glistened now, something fragile flickering behind his calm demeanor. "I'm sorry, Julie," he said quietly. "For every single day you spent in that house suffering. I should have come sooner. I tried, but there were things I had to fix first. I didn't want to expose you to more danger, but someone very dear to me, someone I respect more than anyone else begged me. He pleaded with me to help you. And I couldn't say no. His voice cracked ever so slightly, and for the first time, Julie saw the edge of a tear slide down his cheek before he wiped it away quickly, almost like he wasn't ready to show that part of himself. Julie's breath caught. Her thoughts scattered like leaves in a storm. Who could have spoken about me to him? Who cared that much? The question hung on her lips, but before she could ask, Simeon seemed to sense it. "Not yet," he said gently, reaching over to pat her shoulder, his hand warm and steady. "When the time is right, you'll know, I promise." And still, the questions lingered, buzzing in her chest like a swarm. Who had known her pain so deeply? Why had Simeon, a stranger she had been forced to marry just this morning, cared so much? Could she trust him? Was this real? She sat there in silence, her fingers lightly brushing the spoon beside her plate. Her world flipped upside down in a single day. But somewhere deep within, beneath the fear and doubt, a flicker of something new stirred, something she hadn't felt in a long time. The past still clung to her like a second skin, the kind that wouldn't peel off no matter how hard she tried. It haunted every breath, every thought. Julie stared down at the plate in front of her, untouched, emotions swirling in her chest like a storm refusing to settle. Simeon noticed the faraway look in her eyes, the weight she carried without saying a word. Quietly, he walked over and sat across from her, his gaze steady. "I know it's hard, Julie," he said gently, "but I need you to understand something. I'm not here to harm you. Everything you've gone through, I want to help make it right." Julie looked up slowly, her expression unreadable, but her voice trembled as she finally asked the question that had been gnawing at her since the moment she stepped into his house. "What do you want in return?" she whispered. The silence that followed was thick, heavy. Then Simeon shook his head, his voice low and firm. "Nothing. I don't want anything from you. I just need you to trust me through all of this. That's all I ask. Trust is hard, I know, but I promise you, I'll do everything I can to make this better." Her throat tightened. Everyone had turned their backs on her. Her stepmother, who used cruelty as her only language, and her father, who had gone on a business trip, and she was yet to hear from him. The idea that someone, anyone, could offer her kindness without conditions felt too foreign to be real. Trust wasn't something Julie could give easily, not anymore. And yet here he was, a man she'd been forced to marry just hours ago, offering safety not only to her, but to the child growing inside her. Her heart warred with her logic. And yet, despite everything, the betrayal, the abandonment, the silence she'd grown used to, something in his voice planted a seed of belief in her, a flicker of fragile hope. As she reached slowly for the food, her fingers brushing against the edge of the tray, a lump rose in her throat. She still couldn't shake the fear that her past would find a way to ruin this too. That the shadows she thought she'd left behind were only waiting for the right moment to return. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something she never thought she'd have again, a second chance. In the days that followed, Julie began visiting the hospital regularly with Simeon by her side, attending every antenatal appointment he had carefully arranged. For the first time in a long while, she tried to find joy in something, her unborn child. Slowly, she allowed herself to feel again. She would place a hand on her belly and whisper names, trying them out with a shy smile. Simeon encouraged her, driving her to baby stores, helping her pick out tiny clothes and soft blankets, letting her choose everything from bottles to tiny shoes. He even enrolled her in a special maternal class, a small, quiet gathering of young, expectant mothers, where she learned how to care for a baby, how to hold on to herself in the process, and most importantly, how not to see her situation as the end of the road. "This isn't the end of your story, Julie," Simeon told her more than once. "This is just the beginning." Hope returned, timid but glowing. Julie began to believe that maybe she could still finish school, maybe even chase a future beyond pain. She decorated a little corner of the room with the baby things she'd gathered: ribbons, socks, and a soft stuffed bear Simeon had surprised her with. But life, so full of promise, shifted cruelly again. It happened during childbirth. She had gone into labor late in the night. The pain was sharp, consuming. Simeon rushed her to the hospital, holding her hand all through the panic and struggle, whispering that everything would be fine. But it wasn't. Complications arose. The baby didn't make it. A stillbirth. A boy. Perfect. Silent. Still. Julie barely remembered the moment they told her. Her body was weak, but her soul shattered. She had named him already. She had imagined the sound of his laugh. Now there was only silence. When they returned home, Simeon carried her gently. She didn't speak. For days, she sat in the nursery corner, staring at the folded clothes and unopened packs of diapers. She refused food, refused sleep. Her eyes stayed red and swollen, lips cracked from silence. Simeon didn't push her. He sat beside her in quiet companionship, placing a warm plate on the table each day, even when he knew she wouldn't touch it. On the fourth day, she collapsed in tears, clutching the tiny blue hat that would never be worn. Simeon called in a therapist. It started with resistance. Julie said nothing at the first session. But eventually, through tears and slow breathing, the words came. The pain poured out in pieces. Her grief, her guilt, her fear. She talked about how she had blamed herself, how she felt she'd failed at the one thing she'd clung to. The therapist guided her through it with patience and compassion, helping her see the difference between guilt and grief, between pain and punishment. It was not easy. But slowly, step by step, Julie began to find her way through the darkness. Simeon remained at her side, not just as the man who had saved her from the streets, but as the one who refused to let her drown in sorrow. She still had the memories. The weight of loss never vanished, but she began to breathe again, and this time, it didn't hurt quite as much. Julie's life was slowly taking shape, no longer defined by tragedy, but by the choices she now had the power to make. With Simeon's unwavering support, she started to breathe again, not just to survive, but to live. He never left her side. In the months that followed the painful loss of her child, Simeon became her quiet strength, always engaging her in meaningful conversations, never letting her slip into silence. They'd sit by the garden or take walks through the long hallways of the mansion, and he would ask questions. What made her smile as a child? What dreams she still carried? What she would do if fear wasn't holding her back? These weren't just questions. They were lifelines, pulling her out of the fog. One afternoon, as the sun spilled through the windows, he asked gently, "Julie, what do you want to do now? For you?" Her answer came slowly, almost a whisper. "I want to be a midwife." Simeon paused, looking at her with quiet curiosity. "Are you sure?" She nodded, this time with more conviction. "Yes, I want to help women. I want to be there for them the way no one was there for me." It wasn't just a decision, it was healing turned into purpose. Simeon didn't hesitate. Within weeks, she was enrolled in one of the best midwifery schools in the region. The environment was competitive, demanding, but Julie poured herself into it with the same determination that had carried her through the darkest seasons of her life. She excelled in classes on maternal health, prenatal care, and neonatal emergencies. Her passion was evident in every assignment, every simulation. When her classmates spoke of techniques, Julie spoke of compassion, of sitting beside a laboring woman and whispering, "You are strong, you can do this," because she knew the power of those words firsthand. She graduated with honors, but she wasn't done. Fueled by everything she had endured, Julie began holding community classes for young women, educating them not only about childbirth, but about self-worth, consent, and reproductive health. She visited schools and rural centers, giving bold, passionate talks about the power of the girl child, how education, safety, and the right to choose could change everything. "You are not what happened to you," she often said. "You are what you become in spite of it." Her story began to inspire many. With Simeon's help, she established a women's wellness center in underserved communities, offering prenatal care, counseling, and skill acquisition programs for pregnant teens. She worked day and night, not out of obligation, but from a place of deep understanding. Every mother she helped, every life she touched, it was like mending a piece of her own soul. And through it all, Simeon remained, always in the background, always present. He never demanded gratitude, never stood in her light, but his support was the foundation upon which she rebuilt her world. Julie, the girl once thrown out and discarded, had found her purpose, and now she was determined to be the voice that would never let another girl feel invisible again. One quiet afternoon, Julie stood by the window of the foundation office, staring out at nothing in particular, her heart pulling her toward a memory that refused to fade. It had been on her mind for days now, a longing that wouldn't let go. She could still remember the hushed nights when her father used to slip quietly into her room, crouching beside her little bed. He would gently stroke her hair and whisper promises in the dark. "Julie, just be patient. I'll work hard. I'll get us out of this life." And she had believed him, not because the words were grand, but because she saw the weariness in his eyes, the silent regret he carried after marrying Florence, even though he never dared to say it aloud. He had loved her mother deeply. Julie knew that. And when her mother died, something in him faded too. That evening, they were having dinner at the long table in the softly lit dining room. The quiet clinking of cutlery filled the space between them. Julie dropped her fork gently onto the plate and looked at Simeon. "I think it's time I look for my father," she said. Simeon looked up slowly, his eyes already knowing. "Julie," he said, "I think it's time too." She tilted her head, puzzled. Time for what? Simeon rose from his chair without answering and walked out of the room. She watched him climb the stairs, disappearing into the hallway. Minutes later, he returned, holding a small envelope with worn edges. He handed it to her without a word. Her fingers trembled as she took it, recognizing the handwriting immediately. Her throat tightened as she unfolded the paper inside. "My dearest Julie, by the time you read this, I would have been long gone. I wish I could be there beside you when you open this. But fate had other plans. The day I left home, I promised you I was going to work hard, so hard that one day I would take you and your mother out of the pain, the hunger, the struggle. I meant every word. But life, Julie, life doesn't always give us what we plan for. I had an accident, a terrible one. I was bedridden for months, broken in more ways than one. I couldn't move, couldn't speak for a while. I thought I would die there with nothing but my regrets. But God sent someone, Simeon. My old friend from many years ago, he found me when I was nothing but bones and breath. He took me in, cared for me, and gave me the strength to say one last thing before my body gave out. Please, find my daughter. Save her. If you ever loved me as a friend, find her and give her a chance. I couldn't. Julie, I'm sorry. I failed you. I left you in the hands of a woman who never saw you for the precious child you are. I should have come back sooner. I should have found a way to protect you. Not a day went by that I didn't think of you. Not a night that I didn't cry praying you were safe. I remembered your little voice, your eyes that looked so much like your mother's, your dreams to become something great. You deserved more. I'm sorry I wasn't there to shield you. But if Simeon has given you this letter, then it means he kept his promise. It means he found you and that you survived. You fought, you rose, and I couldn't be more proud. I may not be there to see the woman you've become, but I feel it. I feel your strength, your light. And I know, wherever I am, that my daughter made it. Please forgive me. Not because I deserve it, but because your heart is big enough to understand the pain of a father who tried and failed. Live, Julie. Live fully. Be everything I couldn't be. And when the world tries to remind you of your past, remind it of your power. With all my love, your father, Andrew Chukwuma. Julie's hands trembled as she clutched the letter to her chest. The man she had longed to see one last time was gone. The one person she believed she might still hold on to had slipped quietly into eternity. Her fork clattered to the floor as tears spilled from her eyes. "He's gone," she whispered. Simeon stood beside her, silent. A tear escaped his eye too, but he turned quickly and wiped it away, unwilling to add to her grief. His heart ached, not just for her loss, but for everything she had survived. Julie's life had been a collection of scars, abandonment, betrayal, death, and now this. And yet here she was, still breathing, still standing, still full of purpose. The moment stretched between them, heavy with sorrow, but also something else. Resolve. The letter had broken something in her, but it had also stitched back a piece. She now understood the depth of the man who saved her, and the promise he fulfilled, not for glory, but for love, for friendship, for a broken father who had never stopped believing in his daughter. Life had gone on, even if Julie often felt like parts of her had been left behind. She poured herself into her foundation and her studies, showing up for every woman in need, every girl who had been silenced like she once was. But behind her strength, behind the speeches and the tireless work, were quiet nights when she cried herself to sleep. Some mornings, she stared into the mirror just to remind herself that she had survived. The pain didn't vanish. She had simply learned to live through it. Letters kept coming, anonymous at first, typed, carefully worded. Then, gradually, they became handwritten, slanted script, shaky lines, apologies, long ramblings about guilt and regret. They always came unsigned, but deep down, she knew who it was. She had tried to ignore them, to protect the peace she had built with so much suffering. But each letter chipped away at the distance she had carefully created. It was a hot afternoon, and she was returning from a speaking engagement. Her convoy of vehicles moved slowly through a crowded road on the outskirts of the city. She sat in the back seat of the black SUV, going over notes for an upcoming seminar, when the brakes screeched suddenly. "Ma," her driver said cautiously, "someone is lying on the road." Julie looked up, annoyed at first, until she caught sight of the frail figure in front of them. An old woman, clothes torn, skin pale, her frame barely held together. The guard stepped down to remove the obstruction, but something held Julie's gaze. She leaned forward, squinting. There was something familiar about that face, worn, weathered, but deeply familiar. "Wait," she said. She stepped out, high heels clicking against the tarmac. As she moved closer, the woman lifted her head weakly, and their eyes met. Julie froze. It was Florence, her stepmother, sick, dirty, broken in a way Julie had never seen before. Florence tried to sit up but couldn't. "Julie," she croaked, her voice barely audible. "Please, help me." Everything around Julie faded. She stood there, staring at the woman who had once cast her into darkness, who had watched her suffer without flinching, who had handed her over like garbage. Now here she was, begging for mercy in the middle of a road. Julie didn't respond immediately. She knelt slowly beside the woman who had tried to break her. "You left me to rot," she said quietly. "You sold me off like a burden." Florence trembled but said nothing. Her eyes glistened, pleading. "Why now? Why come here?" "I had nowhere else," Florence whispered, coughing between words. I've been sick. Everyone turned away. I lost everything. Uncle Femi. He disappeared after people found out the truth. He couldn't live with himself. He ran into exile. I haven't heard from him in years. I was cruel. I know. I've lived every day with it. Julie closed her eyes. The memory of Uncle Femi's betrayal stung even now. How he had taken advantage of her innocence. How Florence had defended him, called her a liar. And now, that same woman lay before her, fragile, humbled. Without a word, Julie instructed her team to help Florence into the vehicle. She sat beside her in silence, the vehicle humming back to life as they headed to the hospital. Midway through the drive, Simeon looked at Julie, concern etched across his face. Julie, are you sure? After everything she did to you? Julie didn't look at him at first. She stared out the window, the city blurring past as memories played in her mind. Then softly, with a voice that carried the weight of everything she had endured, she said, "She didn't destroy me, Simeon. She tried, but she failed. I'm still standing. That's why I have to help her. Not because she deserves it, but because I need her to see who I've become." Simeon said nothing for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. "You're an angel, Julie. Even after all this." Julie took her to the hospital. Over the weeks, she funded her treatment, saw to her meals, and made sure she had a bed to sleep in. Florence broke down more than once, whispering things Julie had long buried, how she had hated her out of envy, how she couldn't bear the memory of Julie's mother, and how she had never expected to live long enough to beg for her forgiveness. Julie listened quietly. She didn't respond much. Sometimes forgiveness isn't loud. Sometimes it's just choosing not to let pain poison your soul. For the first time in nearly 20 years, Julie stood before the graves of both her parents, the mother who had loved her deeply and the father who had tried, in his own broken way, to protect her. She had organized a quiet remembrance, just family, close friends, and the few people who had stood by her when everything crumbled. Laying down white lilies, she whispered through the silence, "Rest well, Mama. Rest well, Papa. I've become what you both dreamed I'd be." Their names etched in stone were no longer a source of sorrow, but of quiet pride. They had given her roots, even if life had tried to sever them. Simeon stood close that day, not as the man who once rescued her from despair, but now as a friend, content and fulfilled, having finally found someone to build his own future with. He had fallen in love, and she was genuinely happy for him. But Julie wasn't ready for love. At least, not yet. Her heart had known too much loss, and right now she was married to her purpose. She wanted to focus on empowering girls, reshaping policies, expanding her foundation, and rewriting the narrative of women like her. As she spoke later that evening at her global outreach event, she asked the crowd, "If you had been in my shoes, would you have saved Florence? Would you have offered compassion to someone who never gave you any? And if not, what would that say about who we become after the pain?" Julie smiled gently as the audience sat in quiet reflection. Let's talk in the comments. Your thoughts, your truth. I want to hear where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more real, thought-provoking stories like this one.